Performance. This is a word which we can use to describe how quick a car actually is. And this can be broken down, I think, into 3 specific categories. The first one is power. You can't get a car up to speed if you haven't got enough power to get there. The second one is handling. It's pointless having all the power in the world if you can't put it down and if you can't go around corners. And the third one is braking. It's super important if you can get your car up to speed quickly to be able to bring it back down quickly as well. So in this video, we're going to be upgrading the performance of my Audi TTS. But there is one thing which we need to measure first. .9 decibels. That's a bit pathetic, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. Now, the first thing which we're going to look at is the handling of the TT, but I'm going to do this in a slightly different way to what I normally would. Obviously, I'm going to be fitting coilovers, and we'll come back to what they are in a second, but the way that I normally do this, I've been advised, is the wrong way for this car. But we'll come back to why I've done this a little bit later. But first, let's have a look at the coilovers I'm fitting, do the rears, and then come back to this. So here we have a set of the finest Bilstein B16s. Now, I've fitted Bilsteins to many of my cars now and never been disappointed with the ride or the handling or the quality of the product. And that is why we're fitting Bilstein B16s to the Audi TT. And it does seem pretty fitting that the spring is almost a matching colour to the car and the shock is a matching colour to the wheels. So it's pretty much perfectly colour-coded to my car. So like I already said, we're going to be starting on the rear, and this is where the main problem was on the car. One of the shocks is definitely not playing right, and I've got a slight knock from the rear end too, which I believe is caused by this. So once I've undone the little bracket which attaches to the arm which communicates with the headlights for the level sensor, I can then start taking out all of the bolts which will release the lower arm for the spring, and then take that out to make room for the new adjustable spring setup. And once that's removed, I could then start to look at the shock itself. I started off with the bolt at the bottom. I think it was a 21 on this, and it was pretty tight, so I had to use a breaker bar to crack it off, and then I could wind that bolt all the way out and turn my attention to the top mount. There was only 2 bolts just tucked behind the wheel arch liner and a plug, and then the shock was off the car. Right, I've got my new shock with the top mount on ready to go, but I just thought I'd share this with you quick because I've always had troubles with getting the top mount on a new shock, and well, this kind of fixed it for me really. This is a toolkit that I got in Monaco when we went there in the 350Z, and I broke down. I had to go and buy this toolkit to get my car back on the road to be able to make it home. But I've just realised it's kind of a socket and ratchet with unlimited depth. So you could put it on a stud, say for example the stud was up here, slide it down and you'd still be able to tighten it. But there's another benefit too, because when you're tightening shocks, you want to try and hold the Allen key or the Torx head in the top, normally like you get on coilovers, and that way you can hold the shaft still whilst tightening the nut. Normally with a ratchet you wouldn't be able to do that, and you couldn't use a ratchet spanner because it has no depth to be able to get on there, but using this means you can put it on, you can tighten that, and there's a hole big enough that you can put an Allen key in the top. It's probably a normal thing, I've just never seen it before. So now I'm done chuffing over my fancy ratchet, I can get the new coilover on the back of the car. It's the exact same in reverse, if not a little bit easier, because these don't have mag ride, but I do need to get a mag ride resistor to take the suspension warning light off the dash. Then I can get the back spring into place, but this spring is a little bit stiffer, so what I've got to do in order to be able to compress the arm back up is to use an axle stand and then lower the car ever so slightly onto the axle stand under the arm, which will compress the spring and allow me to push the bolt through and get it all tightened up. And that is the rear coilovers installed. Hopefully I'm happy with the ride height, but now we can move on to the front. So the first thing I want to do on the front while the car is on the floor is crack off the drive shaft nut. Okay, the rears are on. Now we're going to move on to the front, and as I said earlier, I'm going to do this slightly different to how my head says I should. Now first thing, well, I don't think this is a good idea particularly, and I definitely don't advocate doing it, so for your own safety, do not try this at home. But I haven't got any spring compressors at home, so I'm going to essentially use the car as my spring compressors. So I'm going to take the top mount off before I lift the car off the floor. And to do that, I've got my fancy ratchet, which I mentioned earlier, and a Allen key, which goes to the middle of that. And then I should, in theory, be able to take the top mount bolts off before I jack the car up. And then this way, when I lift the car in the air, the weight of it slowly comes off and then the top mount will be loose. And hopefully it won't come off with a bang, but I can't see why it would. Okay, so it turns out I've just found out the reason why you're not supposed to take out the top mounts before you jack the car up. Because over the floor here, what we have is my top mount bearings. So these may have been goosed already and you just fell apart when you were taking it out, which could have happened when I was just taking them off, or doing it the way that I did could have caused this. But for those of you that knew that was going to happen, you can laugh at me, and for those of you that didn't know that was going to happen, now you know not to do the same thing as what I've done. So there's a mistake that I'm going to have to learn from. And that's a bit of an unexpected surprise, and it's not ideal, but it's also not the end of the world because it's quite an easy part to get. But when you don't want an unexpected surprise is when you're buying a used car. Which brings us nicely onto Car Vertical, who have sponsored today's video. So let's say you've been working hard for years and years and you're finally in the position where you can afford to buy your dream car, a Lamborghini. So you hop onto your computer and have a search, and finally you find the perfect car, an orange Huracan. I love it. The last thing you want to do once you've found that car is waste your time and money going to view it if it's not what you thought. So before you go and view that car, do a check with Car Vertical first. Just like we did on this Lamborghini Huracan, you can see here the car has 3 green ticks, 1 for mileage, 1 for theft and 1 for finance, but it does have an amber warning light for accident damage. Car Vertical also gives you an activity timeline which chronologically orders everything that's happened to the car, like MOT history and reg plate changes, so you can see what's happened to the car and when it's happened. The good thing with this car, you can see that the mileage is legitimate because there's no dips in the mileage graph. And then finally the damage. You can not only see where on the car the damage was, but also where in the world it was too. But if you scroll a bit further down, you can see some actual photos of the damage, which shows this probably isn't your dream car anymore. So whether you're buying a used car, selling one you currently own, or you just want to check on your own car to make sure you didn't get done over, make sure to go to the link in the description or use discount code Chris, and this is going to save you a whole 10% on your Car Vertical check. But for now, thank you Car Vertical for sponsoring this video. You guys go and show them some support for looking after the channel, but let's get back to fitting these coilovers. So I said earlier in the video that I was going to try and do this a slightly different way to what I would normally do it. So normally I'd try and take the shock off from the car, leaving the hub in place and putting something in the back of the shock to split it open to give you enough room to be able to slide the shock out of the hub. Now my mechanic friends said that the way that they would do this is to take the whole hub off the car. So take the brake caliper off and then take the disc and the hub and everything including the shock away from the car, and then split the hub off the shock off the car. And while it was my intention to try it this way because I thought this looked a bit easier, I just didn't think it was the right way to do it in my environment on the floor with limited tools. So I could have done with a bit more room, and I definitely would have done this way because I can see how much easier that would have been. But as I said, that's not how we did it in the end. So once the new coilover is in place, I can tighten all of the bolts up, and we have some fresh Bilstein B16 adjustable coilovers in place. And that is the coilovers officially installed, and it is absolutely battered me. It's a lot harder working on the floor with limited tools than it is on a ramp in a workshop, and it takes a lot more energy too. I'm tired, bruised and cut, but I am satisfied that the job is done, and all I've got to do now is get the wheels back on and tighten up the drive shafts, which I've got to do when the car's on the floor. Now what I was actually intending on doing, but again I didn't quite have the tools that I needed to do it, is actually taking the whole hub off. My mate who's a mechanic said that this is the easier way of doing it because you're not messing around so much in there. Even though it seems like the long way, apparently it's a lot quicker. But yeah, I just didn't end up doing that. It didn't work in this environment. Yes, we know Chris, you're repeating yourself. But anyway, as it turns out, I didn't need to loosen off the drive shaft, which I've now got to tighten back up, but the wheel is back on and we can move on to the next bit. Well, it's a new day, and while the coilovers are fitted, there's still more work to do. Now, I'm going to leave the ride height as it is for now, even though it's slightly higher on the front than it is on the back, because coilovers have a little bit of time to settle in and to bed in, and then once they've done that, after a couple of days, I'm then going to set up the ride height exactly how I want it. And while I'm waiting for that to happen, I've got something more which I want to add to the car, to add to the performance package that we're going to be doing to it, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to do it here at home, but all I can do is try, so let's give it a shot. So here we have the next modification for the Audi TT. So I don't want to go too mad with the sound of the TT, so what I've gone for is a Scorpion D-Cat downpipe, and I've selected the option for it to fit the standard, OEM exhaust. That way it keeps the original back box, keeps costs down, but also as well it means that it's not going to sound too ridiculous, because at the end of the day it is supposed to be a daily driver, so I don't want to be having, you know, ridiculous cold starts or anything like that. I just want a little bit of extra sound and some performance gain. Now, the reason why I say I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to fit this at home is because it may be the case that I have to drop the subframe in order to get the old one out. On the Quattro models of the TT, it's a little bit more awkward than it is on the front wheel drive ones. And I don't know whether I'm going to have the space underneath the car on axle stands to be able to do that. So I'm going to give it a shot, see how I get on, and if all else fails, then I can, you know, borrow someone's ramp at a later date and get it fitted.
So I need to make as much room as possible in order to get that new downpipe in and the old one off. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the airbox off, and then I might actually be able to see the bolts where the downpipe mounts to the turbo. So I think it was a bunch of T20s around the edge, and that splits the airbox, but I don't actually think I needed to take it apart to do that. But anyway, it pulls out of place and there is one clamp holding it on, and then we can actually see where the downpipe goes to, and well, straight away we can tell it's not very visible or very accessible. I know there is 4 bolts which mount the downpipe to the turbo, so I'm going to start with the ones I can see, and if I remember right, there were 16 mils, and I've got a couple of extensions on a ratchet, and I'm having to use the bar from my jack to actually break the nuts off to be able to get these to crack.
1 bolt down.
So it felt like a good start, and there was another one that I could get to, so I got that one off, and then I had to get the car up in the air.
2 down. Just to confirm for you guys, because I know you can't really see, the ones I managed to get out from the top of this one and this one, I'm going to try and jack the car up now, go underneath, and see how easy it's going to be to get to the bottom 2. And then hopefully what I'm thinking is I might be able to push it out from the top, and then, well, I might be dreaming thinking that. So there is the turbo and the downpipe, and it is tight access. I can just get my camera in here, and it's not helped by the prop, but I think it'd be tight anyway, so I can just get my hand to both the bottom ones. So it is going to be tricky because, well, it takes a lot of leverage to crack them off, so I'm going to have to try my best and see how I do. But then what I'm thinking is, so this is the cat, I believe, just here, and this is where access is going to get tight if I want to go out through the top. So maybe I can cut it just here, and that'll give enough room for the top section to go out that way and the bottom section out this way without having to take the subframe off. Maybe. And at least that keeps the cats intact as well.
So at this point I was feeling pretty positive, it felt doable, so I got a ratchet in place with a socket on the first bolt from the underside, but I just couldn't quite get enough leverage on it in order to crack the nut off.
So I've got the ratchet in place from underneath, and then I've pointed it upwards out the top here and put my extension bar from my jack on, which hopefully will do the job, and fingers crossed that'll give me enough room to lever it, so let's find out. No. Okay, take 2.
So it actually worked better to put another extension on the ratchet to give me more distance away from the turbo, and then again using the bar from my jack to crack the nut off, got it going in the end. This was made trickier because the car is jacked up in the air, but we got there in the end.
Number 3. But I think that one's on the subframe. Yes, I got the final one, so I'm not even going to use the footage which I got under there because it's just going to be rubbish, but I managed to use the tool of the day, my kind of very slim ratchet, get that on there, and then just managed to get the jack bar on it and just crack it, and then fiddle around in there until it finally came out. So now I need to disconnect the other end of the exhaust, get the lambers off. I think I'm going to cut it in the middle, and then try and take out both sections of the downpipe.
Using a 22mm spanner, I managed to get the lamber sensor off by the downpipe and also on the midsection of the exhaust, and progress felt pretty good. So it was time, once I got the lambers off, to then go underneath the car and take off the clamps which held on the other side of the exhaust to the car, and then I could start cutting it. Now these bolts were all super corroded, so again the jack bar comes out and snap the clamp, but that doesn't matter because I got a spare one with my new exhaust. And also I can really obviously see that the exhaust was blowing at this section, so I'm glad it's going.
Come on! Right, everything is now disconnected. All the bolts, all the lambers, and everything else is disconnected from the original downpipe and centre section. Then all I've got to do is cut in the middle to then give the back section enough room to come out that way, and hopefully give the front section enough to come out the top. If it's going to work or not, I don't know, but it will definitely make it more manageable either way. So let's get some safety gear on, get under there and get cutting.
So once I'd goggled up, I got under there with my angle grinder and started chopping away at the exhaust so I could get the back section with the second cat and the little silencer on there away from the bottom, and hopefully that'd make the front section of the exhaust small enough to be able to push it out through the top, and then slide the new one in. Now, in order to get the front section of the exhaust out from the top, I felt I needed a bit more room, so I drained the coolant and disconnected the heater matrix pipe and got my mate Dean to come around and pull it out from the top while I pushed from the bottom. And I'm sure you can imagine I was pretty happy about this. But there was no time to waste. It was time for the new one to go in, and we slid it in from the top. As this comes in two sections, we slid the front side in first, and it took a little bit of bending on the bracket in order to get it around the prop, but we did get there in the end after a bit of deliberation anyway, and then it was time to start fastening it up exactly the same as we'd unfastened it earlier. So that's downpipe bolts in and then lambda sensors in. And once those were properly torqued to spec, it was then time for the mid-section of the exhaust, which connects it to the old one. So once that was slid into place, we could then tighten up all of the new clamps and reducers to make it fit onto the old exhaust, and then we could go back round onto the top and finish up in the engine bay by putting the airbox back in and topping up the coolant, and the downpipe install is finally done. And the truth of the matter is, I could not be more happy about it.
So that is the exhaust install complete, and I know I said earlier in the video that performance is broken down to 3 parts and the final one being braking, but if I'm being 100% truthful, the brakes on the TT are actually pretty good, so I'm going to leave those for now. But let's start this up and then let's go for a drive, and then we can see how the car's handling and feeling now, and then follow that up with the decibel reading to see how much louder it is than the standard exhaust. Okay, it's not ridiculous, but it's definitely louder. It's definitely got a bit more volume, but now I'm dying to see how the car's going to drive with those new coilovers and with that decap fitted. I'm hoping it's going to be a bit better. Right, I'm quite excited for this, to be honest with you, because I know the shocks weren't working as they should have before, so this is the first time I get to drive the TT, you know, and it feel like it's a fully working, you know, no faults car. So let's do this. Oh, that exhaust actually sounds so good. At the low RPMs it's really nice and quiet, and then when you start giving it some, it comes alive. That sounds nice. And oh my god, the coilovers, they're so much better. Oh. I'm gonna be real with you, like when I first started driving this car, I didn't really see what the hype was all about, but now I've got them coilovers on, I can't deny it is actually pretty good. It's pretty fun. Because this is the first 4-wheel drive car that I've ever owned, so I kind of expected it to be, well, if I'm being real, a little bit boring because, well, there's no excitement from like the tail kicking out. It has its own sort of, it's fun in its own little way. And I think part of the appeal of 4-wheel drive is that you're confident pretty much whatever the conditions, that you can put your foot down and you're going to be relatively safe, and I do sort of see the appeal of it now. It is a lot of fun. Wow, what a difference those mods have made to the TTS. It's completely transformed the handling, and the sound is perfect for if you're going to be using the car daily, because it's quiet when you're just cruising and it's loud enough when you're putting your foot down. So all in all, could not be happier with those. But to wrap up this video, we need to see how much louder it's going to be than standard. I think it was 89.8 to beat. I might be wrong, but let's see how loud it is now. And there we have it, 106.4 at quite a close distance, so that is a big difference over standard. But I hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing the TT transform so far, and we still have a little bit more to go, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel, smash a like, and I'll catch you next time.